We have a very special guest on today's show. I don't know if you guys realize, but the Chargers drafted a ton of Horned Frogs, and we're bringing on a TCU expert to talk about Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis, and Max Duggan.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. We've been covering the Chargers together for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on YouTube and listen wherever you get your podcast. David, which Horned Frog are you most excited to talk about today?
Well, it's got to be maximum Darius Davis.
Yeah, so not your favorite player, Max Duggan, who we'll get into in his unlikely Cinderella story. But it was also great to hear Stephen Simcox, the host of the Locked On Horned Frogs podcast, talk about why he thinks that Quentin Johnston is a different animal than the other first-round TCU wide receivers we've seen in recent history, and also why he thinks that your boy Darius Davis could be a meaningful part of the Chargers offense if he's used the right way. But here he is, Stephen Simcox. All right, guys, well, we have our very special guest on here with us today. There is not one college Locked On host I wanted to get on more than Stephen Simcox, because he is the host of Locked On Horned Frogs, and the Chargers obviously had the biggest share of TCU players in the draft, drafting 3 TCU guys, and we're getting to all of them today: Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis, and Max Duggan. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on, man. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, it's always interesting, like, what these NFL scouting departments are going to think about a particular school. And obviously, Tom Telesco and company really likes what TCU brings to the table. So that's great. We're excited about it.
Yeah, and you know, the head coach definitely has something to do with it, too. Before this year, it seemed like Brandon Staley definitely had to think for Georgia players, right? And now this year, it swings to TCU. But TCU, I mean, congratulations for you, man. What a run from TCU. One of the most remarkable runs in program history after making it to the national championship game. And Quentin Johnston was a big part of that offensively. But just how it was a special offense, how big of a part of it was Quentin Johnston?
I mean, he was I think he was the main force. Like, Quentin's a guy that he was a holdover from the previous staff, and the first couple of years of his career, I wouldn't say he was a lightning rod personally, but there was definitely this belief of, like, are we really going to let this dude be on campus for 3 seasons and just totally waste his potential?
Sure.
Part of that was his freshman year was the COVID season, and they only played 10 games. But then even his sophomore season, he had over 600 yards. He still led the team in receiving, but it was a pretty incompetent offensive game plan that wasn't really working for him. And I feel like what stood out this year was they really started getting the ball in his hands and letting him get yards after the catch. And that was kind of the big centerpiece of what they did. Which is strange for a guy his size.
Yeah.
But Quentin was the dude, and there were a couple games this year where he had kind of a nagging ankle injury that kept him out of the Texas Tech game. He had to leave the Baylor game early. And if you look back at the season, I mean, those are some of the closest margins of victory they had all year. They had to have a late comeback against Baylor. They really sort of pulled away from Texas Tech in the second half. The bottom line was, when he was not on the field, the other receivers really struggled to get separation. The offense didn't function as well. They loaded the box and stopped the run game. And so Quentin Johnston was kind of the gravitational pull that made this thing work in a lot of ways. It was great to see them finally maximize all those physical gifts that he brings to the table, because, those first couple of years he was at TCU, it was kind of frustrating watching him just sort of suffer out there and not get the ball in his hands enough.
Right, he's a peacock. You got to let him fly on this one. Right? You got to give him the opportunities. But, hey, the Chargers kind of went into this draft really needing to add a deep speed threat, someone who's explosive with the ball in their hands. With QJ, his after-the-catch ability is undeniable. There's no question about what he can do. But do you think he actually played faster than his testing numbers would suggest?
I would think so. I mean, he feels like a guy that just you're not really going to get a great read on his 40 time. I remember the Michigan game stands out. Like, he had the big touchdown that game where he catches a little crossing pattern and makes a hesitation move and then just takes it to the house. And when he really opens up in the field, you can just see
he was pulling away from
strides.
dudes for sure.
Yeah. He was getting away from folks. And then he also kind of has he played basketball in high school. He's a pretty good basketball player. He sort of has that nature of like boxing people out on those kind of curl routes, stick routes, that kind of thing. And he'll drop his hips and like shake off that first defender, use the stiff arm to get 5 or 6 extra yards. So I feel like he's definitely someone that can make things happen with the ball in his hands. It's not going to be like someone we'll talk about later, like Darius Davis, who is just an absolute speed demon. But he has ways of using his size, using athleticism to get extra yards. And then, I think he can run away from folks using those long strides and that big frame that he has. So I wouldn't get too caught up in like, oh man, he ran a 4.6 or a 4.5. I think he's faster than those numbers would suggest. And really it's not the speed as much as it is kind of just how he uses his body to get away from people that makes him special in the open field.
I mean, I know a lot of Chargers fans definitely are looking forward to, hey, if he can hit that top speed and then just let Justin Herbert throw it as far as possible, I think that's something that everyone would like to see, it. Just let him run under that football because, I mean, it's interesting, too, because for a big dude, he kind of has, and I think you saw that in his testing numbers, especially with, like, the vertical, the broad jump and stuff like that, how quickly he's able to get going and get that 6'2" frame, moving. And it's just, once he starts moving, it's so hard to bring him down. But one of the biggest concerns, I think, when the Chargers fans saw this, I know, Stephen, this is, maybe a sore subject here, but the last couple of TCU wide receivers taken in the first round have not exactly panned out in the best way, right? You have Josh Doxson, like 7-8 years ago now at this point, and then most notably Jalen Reagor, who was taken, basically the same selection as Quentin Johnston was, as fate would have it. But what do you think makes him just different than those players? Like, do you have the same concerns with him, or do you think that he's just a totally different type of animal?
Right. I mean, that's totally fair. I think the part of that's valid is he is coming from an air raid scheme under Sonny Dykes and being with Garrett Riley last year. So the route running is not super polished. It's not something that they ask him to do. I mean, there were a lot of kind of option situations, just finding spots in the zone, attacking the grass. So that's something they'll have to hone in on. When we talk about Josh Doxson and Jalen Reagor, there's a couple things there. One, Doxson was more your prototypical big body, like 50-50 ball guy, go up and get it. And I think he was kind of one-dimensional in what he did. And so he got to Washington, and he had some flashes. There were some injury concerns. I think also, just from what I know about Josh, I'm not sure football was like his life, which is fine, just maybe not if you're going to play in the NFL. I don't know if the commitment to getting better was always there.
And you don't have those same concerns about Quentin Johnston, different dude personality-wise like that?
No, I don't. I mean, I think for Quentin, personality-wise, the only concern I would have is he's not a super demanding person, which serves him really well in life, I'm sure. But as a receiver, sometimes you want that guy that's going to be like, hey, get me the ball.
Yeah, that's Keenan Allen.
It sounds like he's more like Justin Herbert, where he's afraid to ask for it a little bit.
Yeah, he's not. I mean, he doesn't strike me as someone who's going to get in the huddle and like yell at somebody or say, "Give me the ball." But as far as like professionalism, being prepared, working hard, I don't have any of those concerns. Switching over to Reagor for a minute, he was really more of a speed guy, and that was kind of his shtick at TCU. They used him in a lot of different ways, moving around the offense. So I think for Quentin, he's not as one-dimensional as those receivers are. So that's a big plus. The other thing, which I'm sure you guys know watching the film, he'll have to work on is just the drops can't happen. And some of that was, I think, early in the year, it was more he was being a body catcher, right? Like sometimes he'd go up for that football and he just wasn't high pointing it.
Right.
He wasn't taking advantage of that size that he has.
And the length,
and the length. I think
catch radius.
Yes. I think later in the year, it was more focus issues. He had a few against Baylor where it was like he was open and you could tell he was trying to run before he got the ball. I feel like as teams targeted him more, double teamed him more, gave him more attention, he would kind of get taken out of the game plan at times. That would frustrate him. And so then it's like, okay, I get an opportunity. I got to make this catch. I got to make a play. And so that led to some drops as well. So he needs to clean up some of that stuff. But I feel like he has more of a complete package than the other receivers we're talking about. And I also think he's just in a better situation. I mean, he's coming to a place where he's got a really good quarterback that's established. He has a few wide receivers around him. He's not going to be asked necessarily to be, the number one dude immediately. And so I feel like it's all that points to positive returns. But there's some legit concerns, and he's going to have to clean some of those up. I just think he's a different wide receiver than Josh Doctson or Jalen Reagor. And so I'm not sure that's the most fair comparison when we talk about Quentin.
Sure. I mean, I don't think stylistically really any of them are the same as any other one, right? But I think it's just programs get histories, right? Like that's just how it's kind of like Ohio State with quarterbacks and wherever you want to go with it next. But like, I like him. I like him a lot. I mean, there's definitely some things to polish up, but it does feel like the upside there is huge if he does put it together. And it does seem like with some of the catches you did see him make, okay, the hands aren't necessarily a problem. The focus, all those things have to get cleaned up. But the Chargers did what we wanted them to. They double dipped at wide receiver in this draft and brought in the electric Darius Davis. So we're going to talk about that, David's favorite draft pick, with Stephen coming up right after this. Before we get to Stephen Simcox talking about David's favorite TCU player, I need to tell you guys about my favorite protein bar, and of course, I'm talking about Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, and guys, you don't have to make the sacrifice of having something on your diet or having something that tastes good. You can have both now, because with Built Bar, you're getting something that's 100% covered in chocolate and soft and easy to chew, and you're also getting a bar that most have 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar, while also getting something that's flavored snickerdoodle chunk puff or cinnamon churro puff or chocolate or peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. There's so many great flavors, and that's what sets it apart to me. When you're dieting, you need something to break up the monotony, and Built Bar is perfect for that. And the great news is you don't have to wait by your mailbox anymore, because you can get them at your nearest Walmart. Go pick up a 4-bar box, or you can go to Sam's Club, save some time, save some money, get a 13-bar box. And I promise you, you'll find your favorite flavor. But if you guys want to, you can still order them online at BuiltBar.com. And since you listen to this show, you can save 15% by using the promo code LOCKEDON15 at BuiltBar.com.
That is right. Now we get to talk about one of my favorite picks in the draft. That is Darius Davis. And the biggest reason the Chargers decided to take Darius Davis was because he was the nation's best return man in 2022. How much did Davis mean to TCU special teams over the past few seasons?
He was huge. I mean, he's tied with Kevontae Turpin, who's now the return man for the Cowboys.
Is this a return man factory over there? What is happening? Kevontae Turpin is insane too, man. That's crazy.
So, Gary Patterson was obsessed with speed. And he also, obviously wasn't always taking like 5-star guys. So he was notorious for getting like some 5'8" dude from Louisiana who ran a 4.3. Like that was his recipe for success. But yeah, he's tied with Kevontae Turpin for most punt returns in TCU history. He had 5 touchdowns over his career in that regard. And I think they were always in big moments too. He had one in their season opener against Colorado where they were down 6-0 and offense wasn't really firing. And so that was a huge swing in the game. Opened the game last year with a punt return after a 3-and-out against Texas Tech and took it to the house, which was a nice start in that one. But also he would flip the field. If he wasn't taking it to the house, he was getting 20, 30 yards, getting into the other team's territory. And so that was a huge boost. He was a major weapon. And with a dude like that, sometimes you live with maybe you should have fair caught that one. And instead he took the ball and, took a loss of yards. But Darius was pretty fearless. And for the most part, he was steady as far as, make sure he wasn't muffing punts. He was catching the ball. He was getting upfield. But he is fast. I mean, he's got another level of speed and elusiveness. And so it's really just about getting the ball in his hands in those situations. I think he'll be a huge asset. And obviously it's a spot in the roster where he can just kind of plug and play immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's what was so attractive to the Chargers in the 4th round is, hey, yes, we're getting a guy who's mainly used as a return man, but he comes in and he's a starter, right? Like we're getting a starter in the 4th round, and we'll see. I mean, the kick return part of it will be interesting. Obviously, 1 kick return for a touchdown as well, but punt returns and those secret yards, I think, especially in the Chargers in a banged-up year last year, they needed all those secret yards they kind of got from DeAndre Carter, and DeAndre Carter left for the Raiders. So having a guy like this come in and potentially even to improve on that, I think is huge. And the great news is the bar for the Chargers punt return man is don't be Travis Benjamin muffing a punt, running into your own end zone and getting a safety. So I don't think we'll ever see Darius Davis do that. I'm going to call that right now. But I think the other kind of thing with Darius Davis, the biggest question is how he fits in offensively, right? What kind of factor can he be actually on the offense besides just the return ability? I think anything you get offensively is kind of gravy if he lives up to kind of the hype as a punt returner, because I just think, that is such a, important position. But he will likely be a gadget player. He'll get that shot at least, right? And we know that he'll get a chance under Kellen Moore, the new offensive coordinator, to be that kind of gadget guy and maybe take things like shovel passes, screen passes, right? Jet sweeps, things like that. I know in, the games that I got to see, they used him like that a little bit at TCU. What did you think did he work in that role well when they tried to use him on those kind of things?
He did. So he had a jet sweep for a touchdown against SMU last year where he clocked in at, I think, 23.47 miles per hour, which was apparently like the fastest football player recorded, college or NFL. I don't know how far that goes back to where they've been keeping those stats, kind of those next-gen stats.
I saw that one. That was insane. That dude broke so many angles on that. Like, people thought they had him, and he just left people standing still. It was nuts.
Yeah, I feel like there's a role for him. They use him on the jet sweeps, obviously a lot of quick game stuff, screens, that kind of thing, as you talked about, Daniel. The question really is, yes, what is his ceiling? As a wide receiver at TCU, there wasn't a lot besides that just because of his size. He struggled against kind of physical corners.
Because he has 4.36 speed, right? So think, okay, hey, he's a legitimate deep threat, but he wasn't used as a traditional deep threat at TCU. I think it was 4 passes that he caught that were 20 air yards. That wasn't really his game.
No, he wasn't running down the seam. I mean, they weren't, trying to isolate him and get him the ball. Sometimes he would sneak out and catch one, but really it was the gadget things that we've talked about. However, that's valuable, and I definitely think he can get big yardage on those plays as much as the Chargers want to use him. And the special thing about Darius is, if he touches the ball 4 times, or 5 times, whatever it is, there's a decent chance he could take it to the house on one of those, just because he does have that explosiveness. And so
every time,
yes, you can definitely use him in that role. That's how they use him at TCU for the most part. And he, again, would be super comfortable in any of those situations.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about Darius Davis and you're talking about some of the things that you might be concerned about, the obvious thing pops into your mind. He's 5'8", 165 pounds. He is undersized. What can you say about his toughness and his play style that can kind of put Charger fans to ease?
I mean, he took a lot of hits at TCU. He was always somebody that would pop back up. He doesn't have an extensive injury history. He was a leader on this team. He was one of the guys that everyone respected and rallied around. And so I don't think he'll be intimidated by any of this. Obviously, it's a different level of football. There's a different level of contact happening here.
Sure.
But he's going to take big hits on punt returns and kick returns because they're violent plays. But he's used to that, and I feel like he'll be ready. We'll see kind of if they can bulk him up even more as he kind of gets into a more refined strength and conditioning program also. But Darius is a dude, and he's been undersized his whole life. So I think he's ready to get out there and make plays, and he won't be fazed by the hits he's going to take at this level of the NFL.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of the 6'1" NBA point guard that's been undersized his whole life. It's that's the last dude you want to get in a fight with, right? Because that dude has been fighting dudes way bigger than him his entire life. Maybe don't mess with that guy, right? So I love that. I mean, he does seem like he does have that dog in him a little bit. Definitely took some big shots, and I'm just excited to kind of see, especially like you talked about with Quentin Johnston, right? He's not going to be asked to come in and be wide receiver 2. That would be a gigantic issue if you needed Darius Davis to be wide receiver 2 for you, right? But if he's wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, and can come in just those specific situations, I mean, I definitely see the role there. And if you're that fast, someone should be able to find a way to use it to your advantage, right? Especially when you're surrounded by Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams, right? A lot of other people to be paying attention to have this 5'8" dude running a 4.36 at 23 miles an hour through your secondary, right? So I'm super excited to see it, but I'm also super excited to talk to Stephen Simcox about Max Duggan, David's favorite player, and a guy who honestly could be the Chargers' long-term backup and has a couple of friends along with him in Los Angeles. So we're going to get into that coming up right after this. We are here with the host of Locked On Horned Frogs, Stephen Simcox. Super happy to have him on today to get this insight because the Chargers drafted 3 Horned Frogs in the 2023 NFL Draft. And that's just today. Make sure you're back here tonight because tonight we'll be doing potentially a live show for the Chargers schedule release, the team that has the most pressure on it to hit a home run here with this schedule release after releasing maybe the best one we've ever seen last year. We'll be back with you guys tonight to talk about that. But now we're talking about Max Duggan. A super hard dude not to like, Steven. I mean, you can talk to us a little bit, just like he ended up as a Heisman finalist, man, and like he wasn't even supposed to start the season as a starter. Like he started this season as a backup from, I don't know the whole story behind it, but what can you tell us a little bit about the backstory behind Duggan's kind of fairy tale story in 2023?
Yeah, it's a great one. So he was a 3-year starter. He came in as a freshman and ended up actually starting the majority of games. And held that role sort of off and on. And I would say like Max's career, the first part of it, he was very inconsistent, but you could see like the intangibles for him were off the charts and the leadership was high. The team loved him. He made a lot of plays with his feet. He can run the ball. He's kind of a tank the way he's built at that quarterback position.
Yeah.
And has, some good arm talent, good arm strength. And then Sonny Dykes gets the job. New coaching staff comes in. He ends up competing with Chandler Morris. Loses the job out of fall camp. They named Chandler the starter, and everybody sort of assumed like, okay, Max will hit the transfer portal because that's just how it goes now in college football.
Yeah.
He could have graduated, had immediate eligibility, it would have been fine, but he decided to stick around. Chandler goes down with a knee injury in week 1 against Colorado, and Max steps in, and he just never really looks back. He played super well, improved a lot on his accuracy, on passing the football and be more consistent. And he was just such a gamer and such a leader that even once Chandler was healthy, they're like, well, we're just going to ride the hot hand here. And they did that all season long. And, yeah, it worked out well. And now he's a draft pick, which is, if you told me, at the beginning of last year that Max Duggan would be on an NFL roster, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked by that. I'd be like, okay, cool. He was undrafted free agent. Somebody's going to give him a shot. That's awesome. Good for him. But he was drafted by the Chargers and, as you said, has a chance to maybe carve out a backup role. So really cool story. And, Max is just like a hard-nosed dude who gets the job done and really took a step up as a quarterback in a lot of different areas this past season, which was fun to see.
Yeah, for Max Duggan here, there's been a lot of questions about his viability kind of as an NFL player. Some of the things that you kind of alluded to there with some of the flaws in his game. Can you kind of tell us about the strongest parts of his game? And, he's definitely a guy that's going to be contending potentially for the Chargers backup job.
Yeah, really strong arm. They threw the ball vertically a lot last season. And so you can see that deep ball, he can make it happen. He can push the ball down the field, good escapability. Is able to run, able to make plays with his feet. Really, I think this season did a much better job of, okay, I'm out of the pocket. Let me keep my eyes downfield. Let's try to make a play through the air, not so much just bailing and running at the immediate first sign of trouble.
Right.
I think his processing got better this year. There's still room to grow there. There were still times where that internal clock would sort of be off, and you could tell he was holding the ball too long. But overall, I feel like he took some huge strides, very coachable. So Steve Avila had a really interesting quote, and it was actually funny. Bruce Feldman for The Athletic wrote the story, and it wasn't about Max. It was about C.J. Stroud and Will Levis and Bryce Young and some of the big-name quarterbacks in this draft. But it was an anonymous kind of quotes from scouts and from coaches about those QBs, and they were talking about Will Levis and maybe some of his issues as a leader. And this quarterback coach from the NFL said, Steve Avila pulled me aside. We were talking about Max Duggan at some point. And he said, listen, man, you don't understand how much we love this guy. And he was like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like he's a leader. He's like, no, like we would die for this dude. Like he is off the charts. Like he's the man. And so I think that's the biggest thing you're getting with Max is somebody who's going to be a professional, get the job done. I think in a lot of ways he's perfect for that kind of the backup QB role. But I don't want to sell him short on the physical gifts. He was a 4-star recruit out of high school. He had offers from schools like Ohio State, in Georgia. Like this is not just a Disney movie type story. Right. This is not a Rudy guy.
He's not Rudy, sure.
You see the qualities there, but I think it really starts with that strong arm and the ability to push the ball down the field. That's what separates Max, I think, of the passer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just the consistency, right? Because there was obviously some underthrown balls in there as well, but it's not because of the arm talent. So when you see people saying like, hey, he was, we're watching Quentin Johnston tape and he's having to wait for some of these balls, that's more just an inconsistency, something that could potentially get fixed down the road. And I mean, to me, like, I want that in my backup quarterback, man. Like, I want the dude who's going to kind of grit it out, and he might not be perfect, right? But, like, he's going to run for, 84 yards, throw for 175 with 2 touchdowns and an interception. You try to grind a game out that way.
Get the job
and
done.
I think that, ultimate uber leadership, kind of as you're describing it there, is something that definitely is, what attracted the Chargers for sure. I mean, they love that, and obviously he has the chemistry already with the 2 receivers the Chargers drafted there. And I think the other thing about Max Duggan is just like, how do you not root for the dude that kind of has that grittiness, that toughness, that ability to kind of overcome being a benched player to come back and lead your team to the national championship game? Like, that's a dude I think that you bet on, and I think his viability long-term for the Chargers, I think they're going to be committed to it, because if you can get that guy in the 7th round, right, and have that dude be on a 7th-rounder contract for the next 4 years, Justin Herbert's backup, that's a win for everybody. And also, thank God he wasn't Rudy and went to Notre Dame. Tom Telesco would have taken him in the 3rd round
immediately
of this year's draft, right? So I'm glad that didn't happen, but it is very exciting. Like, it was weird to see the Chargers take 3 players from a single team. Like, you just don't see that happen very often. And obviously, it was a great team, and they had a ton of dudes drafted. Steve Avila, Trey Tomlinson, the list goes on, Dylan Horton, so many dudes from that team. But how excited are you and other TCU fans to kind of see all of those guys on the same NFL team? A lot of times these guys spread out, and there's not one team you can kind of root for. Well, I mean, TCU fans, if you're trying to jump ship for maybe, Cowboys fans or whatever, I think the Chargers would be, would have a case.
They do. I was asking folks, when I did my draft recap episode a few weeks ago, I was like, are any of you now Chargers fans? And I got a lot of comments of like, yeah, we're following the Chargers. Like, I've already ordered my Quentin Johnston jersey. I'm ready to go. And so I said this off air, like, there was already a pocket of TCU fans who had kind of adopted the Chargers because of the LT connection. And so this just strengthens that. It's really awesome to see these guys, easy guys to root for, all on the same roster. And as long as they're there, we'll be tuned in and we'll be watching it. So yeah, you have some more listeners and watchers of Locked On Chargers podcast now because of this NFL draft.
And I mean, there's also, just the legacy of a guy named LaDainian Tomlinson, right? So I mean, maybe the greatest, I'll just say the greatest offensive Charger of all time, won an MVP as a running back. Yep. I was hoping his nephew would come in, Trey Tomlinson, to the Chargers as well. That would have been, let's just go 4. They need a corner, so it would be great. But thank you so much, Stephen. We really appreciate your time, man. I mean, I think you set the bar for the Locked On College host because, I mean, you crushed it for us today. We really appreciate it. Make sure you guys are checking out the Locked On Horned Frogs podcast because I'm sure there might be some guys next year that the Chargers will be targeting because they obviously have a thing for TCU now. But you guys can follow him on Twitter at Simcox Steven, or you can find the show at Locked On TCU. Thank you so much, man. You crushed it for us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate having me on the show.
A special thank you to Stephen Simcox for coming on the show. Really crushed it. I'm very, very excited about these TCU players, and I'm very, very excited for you guys to be back here tonight when we do our live show covering the Chargers schedule release. David, a lot of pressure. It's like the Super Bowl of the offseason. It's the Super Bowl for the Chargers social media account, and I cannot wait to see what they put together this year because whether it's Pop-Tarts or the anime release they had last year, we know it's going to come through. So make sure you guys are here for that tomorrow, and the best way to do it is by make sure you're subscribed or following for free on YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find the show every day on our social media. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drugmeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD, but the everydayers already know. I know. And you can also find us at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, at Locked On LAC on Twitter, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Thank you guys so much for checking us out. And as the everydayers also know, we will be back with you tonight for tomorrow's show, actually. So make sure you guys are back for that for the schedule release. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.